I stood frozen in the hallway, heart hammering, ears ringing with the faint echo of my daughter's whispers, the kind of stillness that only comes when your entire world starts to crumble beneath you. I wasn't supposed to hear them. Emma and Sophie, my sweet 10-year-old twins, whispering in the soft, conspiratorial way that only sisters can. I was on my way to tell them good night, carrying the stuffed lion Sophie had left downstairs. But the words I caught as I reached their bedroom door stopped me cold. "Sometimes Mom's stepdad comes over," Emma said, her voice light, like she was sharing a secret. "They're always in her room for hours." Sophie made a sound of disgust. "Yeah, and they locked the door. It's so weird." My grip tightened on the stuffed animal, fingers digging into the worn fabric. It was Sophie's favorite, the one she clung to whenever she was scared. Holding it now, I realized how much comfort it had brought her, and how little comfort I could find in it. My brain couldn't process it, didn't want to process it. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing one more step would send me tumbling into something I couldn't come back from. For a moment, I convinced myself I misunderstood. Kids say dumb things all the time, right? But it wasn't the words alone. It was the way they said it. Like it wasn't strange to them, like it was normal. I backed away silently, leaving the lion on the hallway table. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. My mind raced, desperate for an explanation that didn't lead to the horrifying suspicion forming in the back of my head. What the hell were they talking about? Roger, Emily's stepdad, had always been around. A little too familiar maybe, with his constant teasing and backslaps, but nothing that ever set off alarm bells. But now, I couldn't shake the memory of the way Emily laughed at his jokes, the kind of laughter that felt just a little too much for family. The girls' voices drifted out again. "Do you think Dad knows?" Sophie asked. "No," Emma said with certainty. "Mom says he'd freak out." I turned and walked away before I could hear anything else. My footsteps silent against the carpet. I made it to our bedroom, shutting the door softly behind me, and sank onto the edge of the bed. My hands were trembling, my chest heavy with a pressure that refused to let go, like I was being crushed under the weight of everything I had just heard. My hands trembled as I ran them over my face, trying to slow the storm brewing in my chest. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I couldn't stop watching Emily. She looked calm, her hair pulled back loosely, her smile as effortless as ever. But her eyes seemed to dart around more than usual, and her laughter felt slightly forced. Like she knew something was different, even if she couldn't place what. Every movement, every word felt under a microscope. She moved through the kitchen like she always did, sipping her coffee and laughing at something on her phone, completely unaware that my entire perception of her was shifting. "Morning, babe," she said, brushing past me to grab a piece of toast. She kissed my cheek, a quick, practiced peck that felt as hollow as it did automatic. "Morning," I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. She paused, glancing at me. "You okay? You seem off." I forced a smile. "Just tired." The lie tasted bitter. But now, everything had changed. I wasn't just a tired husband trying to balance work and family life. I was a man with a secret, with questions clawing at the edges of my sanity, and no idea where to start. All I knew was this: if what my daughters had said was true, if Roger had been in her room, if Emily had been lying to me for years, then I had to find out, and God help her when I did. That day, I couldn't focus on anything. Work felt like a blur of noise and meaningless tasks, and every minute away from home felt like an eternity. My mind kept replaying my daughter's conversation, the casual tone in Emma's voice when she mentioned Roger and my wife locked away together in her room. My thoughts twisted themselves into knots, searching for explanations that didn't end in betrayal. But by the time I pulled into our driveway that evening, my resolve had hardened. I needed answers. Not guesses, not theories. Answers. Inside the house smelled like dinner, but the warmth of home felt like a distant memory. Emily was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she stirred a pot on the stove. The twins were in the living room, sprawled out on the floor with crayons and paper. Everything looked so normal. "Tea, babe?" Emily said with a smile when she saw me. I nodded, barely returning her greeting as I dropped my keys on the counter. My eyes lingered on her for a moment too long, and she tilted her head. "You sure you're okay? You've been acting weird." I ignored the question. "Where's Roger?" Her stirring hand paused. For the briefest second, something flickered in her expression. Was it surprise? Annoyance? I couldn't tell, but it was there. He hasn't been here in a while, she said casually, turning back to the stove. Why? Just curious, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I didn't press further. Not yet. But that flicker of hesitation, that was enough to tell me she was hiding something. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Dinner, bedtime routines. The same mundane rhythms of family life. But underneath it all I was watching, waiting. Later that night, after Emily had fallen asleep, I crept out of bed and grabbed her phone from the nightstand. I wasn't proud of myself, but at this point, pride was the least of my concerns. Her lock screen opened with ease. She wasn't careful, never had been. I scrolled through her messages, bracing myself for what I might find. But there was nothing, not even a text from Roger. Her chat history was clean, too clean. Normally, there would be messages from her friends, casual chats, reminders, even spam. But now it was empty. Like someone had gone through and erased anything that could be incriminating. It felt deliberate, like someone had swept away all the evidence before it could be found. Frustrated, I put the phone back and sat on the edge of the bed, staring into the darkness. I knew I was missing something. The truth was out there, hiding just beyond my reach, and I wasn't going to stop until I found it. The breakthrough came the next day, and it was completely by accident. I was in the garage, rummaging through a box of old tools, when I came across a stack of papers shoved into a corner. They looked like receipts and random documents. Junk. But as I flipped through them, something caught my eye. It was a credit card statement in Emily's name. My heart began to pound, the kind of heavy, erratic rhythm that only comes when you know something terrible is about to reveal itself. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Grocery store purchases, gas stations, online shopping. But then I saw a charge from 2 weeks ago, a motel less than 10 miles from our house. My stomach turned. I stared at the name of the motel, willing it to disappear, to be some kind of mistake. But it didn't. And as I kept flipping through the papers, I found another charge. And another. She hadn't just been there once. By the time I walked back into the house, my hands were shaking. Emily was in the kitchen again, laughing on the phone, completely oblivious to the firestorm building inside me. Who were you meeting at the motel? I asked, cutting through her laughter like a knife. Her smile faltered. She looked up, her eyes narrowing in confusion. Or maybe something darker. What are you talking about? I held up the statement. This. The model. Who were you meeting? She stared at me for a moment, and then, just like that, the mask slipped. Her face hardened, and a cold, sharp edge crept into her voice. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. And her silence was deafening. And in that moment I knew. I didn't need her to say it. The truth was written all over her face. This wasn't just about me, or her, it was about my daughters. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I might not know the full extent of the betrayal yet. Emily didn't give me an answer that night. She stormed off, muttering something about me being paranoid and controlling. But I wasn't letting this go. Not now, not after everything I'd seen and heard. The next morning, I decided to confront the other half of this equation, Roger. He wasn't an easy man to pin down. Emily always described him as a free spirit, which was a polite way of saying he lived out of his truck half the time, bouncing between cities doing odd jobs. But I knew his patterns, or at least enough of them to know where to start. After dropping the twins at school, I made a beeline for the diner Roger frequented when he was in town. It was a rundown place off the highway, the kind of spot where the coffee tasted like burnt water. Sure enough, there he was, hunched over a plate of eggs and bacon, chatting up the waitress like he owned the place. I walked up to his booth, heart pounding, and dropped the motel statement on the table in front of him. Roger looked up, his face an unreadable mask of indifference. His eyes narrowed slightly, and his jaw tensed, but his voice remained calm, almost mocking. "Morning to you too," he said, his voice slow and deliberate. "Cut the crap," I snapped. "Why are you taking Emily to motels? What the hell is going on?" He leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. For a moment, he didn't say anything, just studied me with this maddening smirk, like I was a kid throwing a tantrum. "Look, Paul," he finally said, "whatever's going on between you and your wife is your business. Don't drag me into it. Don't drag you into it." I hissed. "My daughter said you're in her bedroom when I'm not home. They think it's funny. Do you have any idea how sick that sounds?" Roger's smirk faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. I leaned in, lowering my voice. I don't know what kind of twisted game you and Emily are playing, but it ends now. If I find out you've been careful. He interrupted, his tone cold as steel. You're throwing around a lot of accusations without proof. I didn't back down. I thought of my daughters, of everything I'd sacrificed for this family. I couldn't let this slide, not without a fight. Proof? You think I won't get it? I've already started. His expression darkened, but he didn't say another word. Instead, he grabbed his plate, threw some cash on the table, and walked out, leaving me standing there with my fists clenched. That night, I ordered the DNA test kits. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I knew about my life was crumbling. I needed answers, even if they shattered me completely. The thought of not knowing was worse than anything those results could reveal. I didn't tell Emily. I didn't tell anyone. I waited until the girls were asleep, then swabbed their cheeks and sealed the samples like a man on autopilot. My hands were shaking the entire time, but I didn't stop. Emily noticed something was off over the next few days, but I was careful to play it cool. I didn't need her catching wind of what I was doing. It took 2 weeks for the results to come in. 2 weeks of pretending everything was normal, of sitting across from her at the dinner table and wondering how much of our life had been a lie. When the email finally arrived, I stared at the screen for a long time before opening it. My hands were clammy, my chest tight with a mix of dread and anger. The results hit me like a freight train. My stomach churned and a wave of nausea surged through me. I stumbled back, feeling dizzy, the room spinning around me as the truth sank in. Probability of paternity, %. Both girls, neither of them were mine. The room spun. I felt like I was drowning, like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. 10 years. 10 years of bedtime stories. Scraped knees, school plays. None of it was mine. And the worst part, I knew exactly whose they were. Roger. The realization sent a wave of nausea through me. I stumbled to the bathroom, gripping the sink as I tried to steady myself. When I looked up at the mirror, I barely recognized the man staring back. This wasn't just betrayal. This was annihilation. And now it was my turn to play the game. I didn't say anything to Emily that night. I couldn't. If I opened my mouth, I knew I'd either break down or explode, and neither option would give me the upper hand. Instead, I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling while she scrolled through her phone, oblivious. The weight of what I knew felt like a bomb ticking down, ready to detonate. The next morning, I started putting my plan into motion. Emily always thought she was smarter than everyone else. That arrogance had worked in her favor. Until now. I'd spent years supporting her, trusting her, but now every ounce of that devotion was redirected toward uncovering the full scope of her betrayal. First, I needed more information. The DNA test told me the twins weren't mine, but it didn't prove Roger was their father. I wanted certainty. I wanted a smoking gun. So, I made a few calls, found a discreet private investigator, and hired him on the spot. Focus on Roger, I told him. Where he goes, who he sees, everything. In the meantime, I started playing the role of the perfect husband. If Emily noticed anything different, she didn't show it. I kissed her goodbye in the mornings, helped with dinner, even surprised her with a bottle of her favorite wine one evening. I was laying the groundwork, earning her trust back just enough to keep her from suspecting anything. But inside I was boiling. Every glance she gave me, every word she said, felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. And the twins. God, looking them was the hardest part. They were innocent in all this, but every time I saw their faces, I couldn't help but see Roger's smirking expression lurking underneath. A week later, the investigator called. You're not gonna like this, he said. Just tell me. Your wife's been meeting Roger at that motel about twice a month, and it's not just him. There's another guy, too. The room spun for a moment. Another guy? Who? Some local contractor. He's married, too. I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady myself. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a web of deceit so tangled, I couldn't see where it began or ended. Did you get proof? I asked, my voice curdled. Receipts. It's all in a file for you. I picked up the file later that day and spent hours combing through it. The photos were the worst. Emily and Roger walking into the motel together, their bodies close, her hand brushing his arm. Another shot of her kissing the other man in a parking lot. Her face lit with the same smile she used to give me. The anger I'd holding back erupted like a dam breaking. I wanted to storm into the house, throw the photos on the table, and watch her squirm under the weight of her lies. But I stopped myself. That would be too easy. Too fast. No, this needed to be precise. Cold. Calculate. I started putting the pieces together. Step 1 was ensuring the twins' safety. Whatever happened, they didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire. I began quietly gathering evidence to secure full custody when the time came. Step 2 was building my case against Emily. Her infidelity, the financial records showing her using our joint account to fund a little rendezvous. It all went into a file I planned to unleash at the perfect moment. And step 3, making Roger pay. I wasn't sure how yet, but I knew one thing for certain when I was done. He'd regret ever stepping into my house, my life, and touching what was mine. My chest burned with a mix of rage and determination, my vision narrowing as if the world around me was fading away, leaving only my focus on making him pay. The storm was coming, dark and inevitable, like a distant thundercloud rolling closer. Emily and Roger just didn't know it yet. Emily was good at lying. That much was obvious now. But what she didn't realize was that I'd started lying too, and I was getting better at it every day. The weekend came, and I suggested a family outing, something we hadn't done in months. As we walked through the park, my smile felt like a mask, every laugh forced. The girls ran ahead, their laughter ringing out, and I tried to focus on them, to feel the joy I was pretending to show. But inside, the turmoil twisted tighter. Every moment with Emily at my side reminded me of her betrayal, the lies that had poisoned our life together. The girls were thrilled. Emily seemed surprised, and I played my part to perfection. We went to the park, grabbed ice cream, and even took a few photos together like nothing was wrong. I needed to keep the facade ad intact a little longer, to lull her into thinking I'd let go of whatever had been bothering me. But my mind was already working on the next step. Monday morning, I took a detour on my way to work and stopped by the clinic that had processed the DNA tests. It wasn't enough to know the girls weren't mine. I needed to confirm who was their biological father. The lab tech hesitated at first, citing privacy policies. But a well-placed lie about needing the results for a custody case opened the door. The next few days were a waiting game, but it didn't take long for the call to come. Meth. Carter, the tech said, her voice cautious. The DNA comparison confirms that the biological father of both children is the same individual, Roger Davis. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in my car for what felt like an eternity. Hearing it confirmed didn't make it any easier to accept. It wasn't just that Emily had cheated. It was that she'd built an entire family with someone else and let me believe it was mine. For 10 years, I'd been raising Roger's daughters. The weight of it hit me in waves, each one harder than the last. But instead of breaking me, it solidified my resolve. If Emily thought she could walk away from this unscathed, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. I started small, planting seeds of doubt where they would grow the fastest. I made a casual comment to her sister during a family dinner about how funny it was that the twins had Roger's eyes. Her face tightened, her eyes narrowing and her lips pressing into a thin line, but she didn't say anything. A few days later, I mentioned to one of our mutual friends that Emily seemed fully close to her stepfather. By the end of the week, the whispers had started, quiet enough for Emily not to notice but loud enough to lay the groundwork for what was coming. Then, I set up the first confrontation. Not with Emily, but with Roger. It was late on a Thursday when I pulled into the parking lot of the motel. I'd gotten a tip from the investigator that he and Emily were meeting there that night. I waited until they'd both gone inside, then gave it 20 minutes before making my move. I knocked on the door hard enough to shake it, the echo reverberating down the quiet motel hallway. From inside, I heard a muffled curse, followed by hurried shuffling as they scrambled to figure out what was happening. Housekeeping. I barked, keeping my voice loud and authoritative. There was a shuffle inside, the sound of someone cursing, and then the door cracked open. Roger's face appeared, his expression shifting from annoyance to shock when he saw me standing there. "What the hell?" he started, but I didn't let him finish. "Nice to see you too, Roger," I said, pushing the door open. Emily was standing near the bed, her face pale and panicked, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched at the bedpost, her voice barely a whisper when she finally spoke. "James," she stammered. I ignored her, my eyes locked on Roger. "So this is where you've been hiding," I said. "Real classy." "Jet out?" Roger growled. I laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere. Not until I get some answers." James, please. Emily pleaded, stepping between us. Don't you dare please me, I snapped. You've been lying to me for a decade, Emily. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? That I wouldn't find out about the twins? Her face went white. I don't know what you're talking about, God. You don't. I pulled out my phone, opening the email with the DNA results. Because this says otherwise. Her eyes darted to the screen, and I saw the moment she realized the jig was up. She didn't try to deny it, not this time. Instead, she turned on Roger. She hissed. Roger looked just as stunned as I felt. What? No. I didn't say anything. Then how does he know? Because I'm not an idiot, I said. Like the two of you. The room fell into silence, the weight of the truth settling over us like a suffocating fog. I could see the wheels turning in Emily's head, her mind scrambling for a way out. But there was no escape now. Enjoy your evening, I said, turning toward the door. While it lasts. Emily called after me, but I didn't look back. Let her stew in it. This was just the beginning. The drive home felt surreal, like I was floating somewhere outside my own body. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel, the tension in my chest so tight it felt like I might snap in two. A pounding headache throbbed at my temples, and my breathing was shallow, each breath feeling like a struggle against the weight pressing down on me. But my mind wasn't on the confrontation at the modal. It was on what came next. They thought this was over, that I'd stormed out in a fit of rage and would eventually calm down. They had no idea. When I got home, the house was dark. The twins were asleep, their backpacks by the door just as they always were. Seeing their things hit me harder than I expected. They were more than just objects. They were symbols of the life I had built with them, of every bedtime story, every scraped knee I had patched up. I realized that, despite everything, I still loved them deeply, and the thought of losing that connection was unbearable. I crouched down, running my fingers over the straps of Emma's bag. The little charms Sophie had clipped onto the zipper. My daughters. They weren't biologically mine, but they'd still called me Dad every day of their lives. And now, because of Emily, they were caught in the middle of a nightmare. I wasn't going to let her destroy them. The next morning, Emily came home just as the sun was rising. She moved quietly, thinking I was still asleep, but I was already sitting in the kitchen waiting. Boozy night. My voice calm. She froze in the doorway, on her purse. James, listen. Sit down. The tone of my voice left no room for argument. She hesitated for a moment, then walked to the table and sat across from me. I know everything, I said, leaning forward. About Roger, about the twins, about the other guy. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. James, I cut her off. Don't insult me by pretending there's an explanation for this. I've spent 10 years building a life with you, Emily. 10 years thinking I had a family, that I was a father. And the entire time, you've been lying to me. The tears welled up in her eyes, but they didn't move me. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, she whispered. Like this. I snapped. You didn't mean for me to find out, is that what you mean? You didn't mean for your stepfather to be the father of my kids. Or were you just hoping I'd never ask questions? And her face cruned a moment. I thought she might finally tell the truth. But instead, she played the one card she had left. I love you, James, she said, her voice trembling. We can fix this. We can. I laughed, cold and sharp. Fix this? Are you out of your mind? You didn't just cheat Emily. You didn't just lie. You've destroyed everything. Our marriage, our family, my trust. There's no coming back from this. She started sobbing then, her tears spilling onto the table. I watched her, feeling nothing but a cold detachment, as if the person sitting across from me was a stranger. Her pain meant nothing to me now. Just another consequence of the choices she had made. But I didn't feel pity, didn't feel anything except the cold determination that had been driving me for days. I've already filed for divorce, I said. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. And don't even think about trying to keep the girls from me. They might not be mine biologically, but I'm their father in every way that matters. If you think I'm letting you and Roger anywhere near them after this, you're even dumber than I thought. Her head snapped up, the shock in her expression almost comical. You can't do that. Watch me. With that, I stood up and walked out, leaving her at the table. Her sobs echoing in the empty kitchen. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. Roger had gotten away with too much for too long. It was time he faced the consequences, and I had just the plan to make sure he did. The wheels of my plan began turning that very day. If Roger thought he could walk away from this unscathed, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. This wasn't going to be some loud, messy confrontation that could blow up in my face. No, this would be surgical. Precise. Step 1 was simple. I needed leverage. Without something to hold over Roger, I knew he'd slip away unscathed. I needed proof, something undeniable, to make sure he had no way out when the time came. Roger wasn't just some drifter hanging around the edges of our lives. He had roots here, as shallow as they were. Through the investigator, I learned that Roger had a history, a few run-ins with the law, debts he'd skipped out on, and a reputation for cozying up to women who could bankroll his lifestyle. But what really got my attention was his connection to a local construction company. He'd been working off the books for a small contractor, a guy with a reputation almost as bad as his own. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The investigator came through again with records that Roger probably thought were long buried. False insurance claims, faked injuries, even a few whispers of extortion, though nothing that had ever made it to court. It was all circumstantial, but in the right hands, it could be a ticking time bomb. Step 2 was more personal. I started dropping hints to people in Emily's circle, friends, coworkers, even her family. A casual mention here, a knowing look there. Nothing overt, just enough to plant the seeds of doubt. By the end of the week, Emily was fielding uncomfortable questions about her relationship with Roger, and I could see the cracks forming in her carefully curated image. But the real masterpiece was step 3. One evening while Emily was out, I went through her email. I'd already seen more than enough to justify my actions, and what I found was even better than I'd hoped. There were messages between her and Roger discussing money. Large sums being funneled from our joint account into his. They were careful not to say too much, but the implications were clear. Roger wasn't just her lover. He was also using her to bankroll whatever schemes he had going on. Armed with this information, I arranged a meeting with the one person Roger couldn't afford to cross, his employer. The contractor was a tough, no-nonsense guy named Mike, the kind who didn't tolerate freeloaders or troublemakers. I laid out everything: the financial transfers, the motel rendezvous, even the rumors about Roger's shady dealings. Mike didn't take kindly to being played for a fool. "You saying this bastard's been skimming off my jobs?" he growled, his face turning red. "That's exactly what I'm saying," I replied. "And if you don't believe me, here's the proof." I slid the file across the table, watching as his expression darkened with every page. "Son of a bitch," he muttered. I knew he was trouble. "Do what you want with him," I said, standing to leave. "But I'd start with making sure he doesn't have access to anything that matters." Mike gave me a sharp nod, already pulling out his phone to make a call. By the time I got back home, I felt the first glimmer of satisfaction in weeks. Roger's house of cards was starting to collapse, and he didn't even know it yet. That night, I checked the hidden camera I'd installed in the living room earlier that week. It was a long shot, but I needed to know if Emily and Roger were still conspiring. And sure enough, the footage didn't disappoint. In the video, Emily was pacing the room, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was tight with panic. "Roger, you don't understand," she hissed. "He knows everything. He's watching us." There was a pause, then she added, "We have to figure this out. Now." I smiled. The kind of smile that comes from knowing you've won before the game's even over. They were scrambling, panicking, and soon, they'd both realize there was nowhere left to hide. The next phase of my plan was all about pressure. Roger and Emily thought they were in control, that they could weather the storm if they just kept their stories straight. But what they didn't realize was that I wasn't coming at them head on anymore. I was surrounding them, tightening the noose from every angle until they had no way out. The fallout with Roger's employer hit faster than I expected. By midweek, he'd been cut off from every job site and unceremoniously booted from the contractor's payroll. It wasn't just about the money he'd skimmed or the lies he'd told. It was the whispers I'd fed to the right people. Rumors of him dealing and leaving jobs half-finished. Mike didn't just fire him, he made sure Roger's reputation was radioactive in the local construction scene. That would have been enough for most people, but Roger wasn't like most people. He showed up at my house 2 days later, unannounced and uninvited. I was in the driveway, pretending to tinker with the car when his truck pulled up. The second I saw him get out, his face red with fury, his footsteps pounding against the gravel. "James," he barked, slamming the truck door. "We need to talk." I straightened up, wiping my hands on a rag. "Do we?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "You think you're real clever, don't you?" He spat, marching toward me. "Talking to Mike, spreading your little lies. You're trying to ruin me? Ruin you?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Roger, you've done a fine job of that all by yourself." He stopped a few feet away, his hands clenched into fists. "You don't know what you're messing with," he growled. "Don't I?" I said, taking a step closer. "Here's what I know, Roger. I know you've been sleeping with my wife. I know you're the father of my daughters. And I know you've been using Emily to bankroll whatever pathetic excuse for a life you've been living." His face twisted into something ugly, a mixture of rage and panic. "You don't have proof," he snapped. "Don't I?" I let the words hang in the air, watching as doubt flickered across his face. He opened his mouth to retort, but before he could say anything, I added, "Oh, by the way, I'm not the only one who knows. Emily's little indiscretions are becoming quite the topic of conversation around town." Roger's bravado faltered, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. "You're bluffing," he said, but the uncertainty in his voice gave him away. I said, leaning in just enough to make him squirm. "You're already a pariah in your own world, Roger. How much worse do you think it'll get when everyone knows the full story? How long do you think you'll last when the people you've screwed over start coming for you?" He stepped back, his bluster gone. Without another word, he turned and stormed back to his truck, slamming the door so hard the entire vehicle shook. I watched him drive off, feeling the first real taste of victory. But I wasn't done yet. Inside, Emily was waiting, her face pale and drawn. She must have seen Roger pull up and knew exactly what it meant. "What did he want?" she asked. I shrugged. To blame me for his problems, I guess. Didn't go the way he hoped. On her eyes darted to mine, searching for some clue about what I knew or didn't know. But I didn't give her anything. Not yet. Instead, I sat down at the table and pulled out my phone. "By the way," I've said, my tone casual, "I've scheduled a meeting with a family lawyer tomorrow. We'll need to discuss custody arrangements for the girls." Her face crumpled. "James, please," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You can't do this. They need their mother. They need stability," I corrected. "Something you clearly can't provide." Her sobs grew louder, but I felt nothing. After everything she'd put me through, the lies, the manipulation, had nothing left to give. My heart had turned cold, detached, as if it was the only way to protect myself from the pain she had caused. She'd spent years lying, manipulating, tearing our family apart while I worked myself to the bone to keep it together. Now, it was her turn to face the consequences. And this was only the beginning. The days that followed were a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Emily tried to claw her way back, swinging between desperate apologies and fairy accusations, as if sheer force of will could reverse the damage she'd done. But every tear she shed, every frantic plea for forgiveness, only fueled my determination. The tipping point came on a Thursday morning. I was sipping coffee at the kitchen table when the private investigator texted me something that turned my stomach. Roger had reached out to a lawyer. My jaw clenched at the thought, a wave of anger simmering beneath the surface as I imagined the lengths he was willing to go. It didn't take long to figure out why. Roger wasn't going to let go of the twins without a fight. Maybe he saw them as leverage over Emily, or maybe he actually thought he could weasel his way into their lives as their father. Either way, he'd made his move. And now, it was time for me to make mine. That afternoon, I called the girls' school and scheduled a meeting with their principal. When I arrived, I laid out everything. Discreetly, of course. I didn't want to drag the kids into the mess any more than necessary, but I needed to protect them. The principal was understanding, even shocked, when I explained the situation. Together, we set up a plan to ensure Emily and Roger couldn't pull any surprises, like trying to take the girls without my consent. But the real masterpiece came later that evening, like an artist putting the final stroke on a canvas, the culmination of every calculated move I had made so far. I'd kept the footage from the hidden camera as my ace in the hole. Emily, pacing the living room, practically confessing to everything on the phone. her footsteps echoing sharply against the hardwood floor, her voice laced with tension. It wasn't enough for legal action, yet, but it was more than enough to start pulling the rug out from under her. "Emily," I said that night, my voice steady as I handed her a flash drive. She looked up from the couch, her face worry. "What's this?" "Insurance," I said simply. She plugged it into her laptop, and as the video began to play, her face drained of color. "You recorded me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You're damn right I did," I said, my tone ice cold. "And I'll keep recording every lie, every scheme, every move you and Roger make. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about the twins. And I'll be damned if I let you or him destroy their lives." But her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. She could cry all she wanted. It wouldn't change a thing. "James, please," she said, her voice breaking. "This has gotten out of control. Let's just talk about this, okay? For the girls' sake, for their sake." I laughed bitterly. "You're 10 years too late for that." That night, I finalized the last pieces of my plan. The private investigator had uncovered one more bombshell. Roger wasn't just a liar and a cheat. He was in trouble with some very dangerous people. A failed deal, unpaid debts, something messy enough that he was desperate for cash. That explained the money Emily had been funneling to him. The next morning, I made an anonymous call. Nothing overt, just enough to let Roger's associates know where he might be found. It wasn't my problem how they handled it. By the weekend, the cracks in Emily's world had become impossible to ignore. She was constantly on edge, her phone glued to her hand, her eyes darting around like she was waiting for the next disaster to strike. Friends stopped coming by, and the girls began to notice the tension at home. Emily's forced smiles and the sudden, hushed arguments that erupted late at night. The whispers I'd planted had grown into a roar. Friends avoided her calls, family members looked at her with barely disguised disgust, and even the twins had started asking questions she couldn't answer. But the final blow came on Sunday. I sat her down in the living room, the divorce papers spread out on the table between us. "This is happening," I said, my voice firm. "You can either sign these now and make it easier for everyone, or we can take this to court. But either way, I'm getting full custody." Her hands trembled as she picked up the pen. "James," she said softly, tears streaming down her face, "I never wanted to hurt you. Save it," I cut her off. "This isn't about us anymore. This is about the twins. And if you think for 1 second that I'm going to let you and Roger drag them through this mess, you're even more delusional than I thought." With a shaky breath, she signed the papers. As I watched her name appear on the line, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't happiness or relief. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd done what needed to be done. But as I packed up the papers and walked out of the room, I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over. Not yet. Roger still had a reckoning coming, and when it hit, it would leave no room for escape. The morning Roger's world came crashing down felt like the perfect culmination of everything I'd worked toward. My heart pounded in anticipation, a mixture of satisfaction and relief washing over me as I imagined the look on his face. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice had led to this moment. And it was worth it. I got a call from Mike, the contractor I'd tipped off, telling me Roger's debts had finally caught up with him. His associates had paid him a visit. Nothing lethal, but enough to make sure he wouldn't be showing his face around here again anytime soon. Good. That was one less predator circling my family. As for Emily, the divorce moved forward faster than I expected. She tried to fight me at first, her voice rising in anger and desperation, but the evidence was stacked too high against her. Between her infidelity, the money she funneled to Roger, and her general instability, the courts had no trouble granting me full custody of the twins. When the papers were finalized, she sat across from me one last time, her face hollow and worn. "You've won," she said quietly, bitterness lacing her voice. "Are you happy now?" I looked at her for a long moment. This woman, the one I'd built my life with, was a stranger now. But I didn't feel triumph as I stared back at her, just a deep, etching emptiness. "No," I said simply. "Nobody wins here, Emily. Especially not the girls." She didn't respond, just nodded faintly and left without another word. The twins took the news as well as they could. I kept things simple, explaining that Mom and Dad wouldn't be living together anymore, but that I'd always be there for them. They didn't need to know the uglier details. At least, not yet. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. The house felt quieter, emptier, but I threw myself into being the best father I could. The twins deserved that much. I coached their soccer games, helped with homework, and made pancakes on Saturday mornings, trying to piece together a sense of normalcy in the chaos Emily had left behind. The house felt quieter, emptier, but I threw myself into being the best father I could. The twins deserved that much. I coached their soccer games, helped with homework, and made pancakes on Saturday mornings, trying to piece together a sense of normalcy in the chaos Emily had left behind. But one night, months later, Emma asked me a question that stopped me cold. "Dad," she said, her voice soft, "why don't I look like you?" My heart clenched. I set down the book I'd been reading to them and looked into her wide, curious eyes. Sophie was watching too, her expression just as expectant. I took a deep breath. "Because you're special," I said carefully, "and no matter what, you'll always be my daughters. That's all that matters." Emma smiled faintly, and Sophie leaned against me, her small arms wrapping around my side. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully grasped before: blood doesn't make a father. Love does. I remembered Emma's first steps, how she had stumbled into my arms, giggling with joy. I thought of Sophie, clutching my hand when she was scared of the dark. Those moments were what made me their father. Not biology, but every small act of love. If there's one lesson I'd pass on to every man reading this, it's this: don't ignore the warning signs. Pay attention to the small things, the moments that don't add up. Trust your gut. I spent too many years turning a blind eye to things I didn't want to see. And it cost me more than I can ever fully explain. But if you do find yourself blindsided by betrayal, don't let it destroy you. Don't let it define you. Stand up, take control, and protect what truly matters. For me, that's Emma and Sophie. They'll always be my daughters, no matter what biology says. And as for Emily and Roger, they're nothing but a bad memory now. A reminder of what I survived, and of the strength it takes to rebuild from the ashes.
I didn't confront them. I didn't shout or slam a door. I walked into the garage like I'd just forgotten my wallet. Sat down on the workbench stool. The same stool where I'd rewired Matthew's dirt bike engine when he was 10. The same garage where Dean had spilled oil on my favorite wrench and cried like he'd broken the moon. My hands were steady, but my jaw locked so tight I heard my molars grind. Not my real dad. 7 seconds. That's how long the silence lasted after Dean's words. 7 seconds before someone, probably Carla, changed the subject. 7 seconds that unraveled 27 years of fatherhood with the precision of a scalpel. I found my old thermos behind the paint cans. Still smelled faintly of black coffee and summer mornings. I took a long sip of nothing, then stood up, walked inside, and finished putting on my coat like nothing happened. They were gone already. Off to some movie, or bar, or wherever real sons take their mother while the old man pays the property tax. I drove. No destination. Just followed the road until it curved into the next town. I parked at a CVS and sat in the lot for 10 minutes before walking in. The DNA test kits were on a rack next to the nicotine gum. I grabbed the one with the most clinical-looking box. It promised accurate results in 3 to 5 business days. I wondered how long it would take to unlearn loving someone. At checkout, the teenage cashier glanced at the box, then at me. "Yikes," he muttered under his breath. I smiled politely. "Gift for a friend," I said. He didn't laugh. Back at home, I placed the kit under the bathroom sink behind the expired NyQuil. Carla was still out. I sat in the den and stared at the family photos on the wall. Dean in his high school football uniform. Matthew shaking hands with his college dean. Carla, beaming in every shot like the CEO of a perfectly curated life. I wasn't in many of the pictures. I'd always been the one behind the camera, the one driving, paying, holding bags, making sandwiches, quiet, reliable, a provider, an ATM, a man with checkbooks. That night, I waited until Carla fell asleep. Her usual 10:30 p.m. crash after 2 glasses of Pinot and an hour of scrolling her iPad. Then I locked the bathroom door, pulled out the test, and followed the instructions like a man defusing a bomb. It felt surgical. Spit, seal, register, ship. I wrote down the tracking number, memorized it, then shredded the outer packaging. Nobody saw it. No questions. No drama. The only thing I allowed myself was one word on the tracking envelope: written in tiny black ink in the return address space. Closure. Then I slid it into the mailbox, flag up, and walked back to the house where I apparently wasn't the real father. But I had been real enough to sacrifice my knees, my savings, and my sense of self to make sure they never went without. Dean didn't know it, but I once took a night shift I didn't need just to afford his braces after he cracked a molar skateboarding. Matthew didn't remember the week I skipped lunch to save money when he totaled the Camry during finals week and I replaced it, quietly, no questions asked. But apparently, that kind of fatherhood doesn't count if your blood doesn't match. They called me old. They call me a wallet. Now they were going to learn exactly what happened when the wallet closes shut. Not with a bang, but with silence. 3 days later, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at an unopened envelope from my own insurance provider, not the DNA lab. But it made my heart skip anyway. That's what waiting does. You start seeing answers in every return address. I kept the real envelope in a lockbox at the bottom of my tool cabinet. I checked the lab portal every morning, right after brushing my teeth, before Carla woke up. Same status, processing. The house was quiet that week. Too quiet. Carla had started planning a beach vacation, something just for us, now that the boys were older. She wanted to rent a coastal Airbnb and maybe book a couple's massage. It's been a while, she said one morning, nudging my shoulder, like she was trying to reboot intimacy with an elbow. I gave her a nod and said I'd look into dates. But I wasn't looking into dates. I was looking into Dean's blood type. O-negative. Neither Carla nor I are O-negative. The detail hadn't meant anything when he was born, just a quirky trait the doctor mentioned. Now, it felt like a warning I'd ignored for 2 decades. Then I remembered something else, a mole behind Matthew's ear. Not mine, not Carla's, but in one of those Jared photos from the shoebox, there it was. Same place, same weird triangle shape. I began cross-referencing birthdays with work trips, calendar logs, even vehicle service receipts. One time, my mechanic had written customer dropped off wife's car on a ticket from 1995. I wasn't in town that week. Jared lived 10 miles away back then. All these little details, things I never thought mattered, suddenly, they mattered more than breath. Dean texted on Wednesday. Hey Pops, thinking of leasing a Tesla. Can you help me out with the cosign? I stared at the message like it was a punchline. This kid, this man, who laughed about me being just the guy who pays, wanted me to underwrite his virtue-signaling electric car? I texted back, let me think about it. What I meant was, let me think about how long I've let myself be conned. Matthew sent a group email the next day with links to Airbnb rentals. He and Dean and Carla were already picking bedrooms. I was supposed to drive, apparently, like I always did. I replied all. Sounds good. Let me know if I need to take extra vacation days. I didn't even have a job anymore. Retired 3 years ago. But none of them noticed the sarcasm. Because they weren't reading. Not really. That night I sat in the dark with the living room TV muted. Some crime docuseries flickered on screen. Something about a husband who found out the kids weren't his. Carla walked by, looked at the screen, and scoffed. People are so dramatic. She had no idea I wasn't watching the show. I was watching her. In the silence, a familiar voice echoed in my mind. Dean's laughter, that sentence. He's not even my real dad. The test results weren't back yet. But in my gut, I already knew. I wasn't their real father. But I was the only one playing the role like it actually meant something. And now, I was preparing for a final act no one saw coming. One where the engineer finally dismantled the entire damn machine, bolt by bolt, calmly, quietly, with every tool he'd spent a lifetime mastering. The subject line was sterile. Your DNA results are ready. No fanfare, no thunder, just a digital scalpel disguised as a notification. I clicked it. The browser spun once, then opened. There it was. Twice. Once for Dean, once for Matthew. No biological relationship found. I sat back in my chair, not because I was surprised, but because my body suddenly didn't know how to hold itself upright. I read it again, then a third time. It didn't feel like heartbreak. It felt like a blood clot, a blockage in the artery where love used to flow. I didn't cry, didn't gasp. I just existed. I was no longer part of something. I had just been next to it for 27 years, like a placeholder in a family photo. I closed the browser, stood up slowly, and walked to the garage. Past the tools, past the mower, to the back wall where I kept the old locking cabinet no one had touched since we moved in. The key was in my wallet. Always had been. Inside, beneath a bag of screws and a bundle of blueprints from my working days, was the shoebox. Labeled, Carla, 90s, in her handwriting. Swirly cursive like she was branding a romance novel. I hadn't opened that box in years. No need to. We'd packed it together during the move. She'd chuckled at the love notes and said, God, we were dumb. But inside now, it didn't feel dumb. It felt deliberate. There were Polaroids from the lake trip she took alone in 1996, when she claimed she needed me time. In one, she's smiling on a dock, arm around someone cropped out. Only the hand remained. And the ring. I remember that ring. Gold with a cracked turquoise stone. Jared's ring. Carla's just a friend from work. The guy she said was emotionally intense and too spiritual to be threatening. I found the card next. Faded, water-damaged, tucked into a photo album sleeve. Still think about you. Always will. Jared. No date. But the photo next to it showed Carla in a sundress she only wore once, on the 4th of July, 2 years before Dean was born. My pulse stayed low. I wasn't angry. I was auditing a life. Every baseball glove I'd bought. Every tooth fairy dollar I'd slid under pillows. Every college check I'd signed without reading. None of it had ever been mine to give. I closed the box, set it gently on the counter, and walked back into the house. Carla was upstairs on a Zoom call with her book club, laughing, planning another wine tasting. I sat in the dining room and dialed a number from the fridge magnet I'd kept for years but never used. Harper Investigations, this is Lila. I cleared my throat. My name is Ronald P. Dodd. I need to speak to someone about tracking a man named Jared. I have a rough window. And motive. She paused. Motive? Yes, I said, glancing toward the ceiling. My wife. A beat of silence. Then, we'll assign someone discreet. Tomorrow morning? Perfect. I hung up. Carla walked into the hallway a moment later, wine glass in hand. You okay? She asked casual. I nodded. Just thinking about the boys. She smiled warmly. Ah, you're such a softie. I smiled back. But something inside me had calcified. Because now I knew the truth. And I wasn't the soft one anymore. The private investigator moved faster than I expected. Maybe it was professional courtesy. Maybe it was the unspoken tone in my voice when I told her what I was looking for. 72 hours later, I had a thumb drive, 2 manila folders, and a message. You'll want to sit down before you go through this. I didn't sit. I stood at my kitchen counter at 6:03 a.m., coffee untouched, glasses on the bridge of my nose, and opened the first folder like I was reviewing launch specs for a rocket. Except this time, the payload was every line my wife had carefully tucked into the margins of our marriage. The phone logs went back 10 years. Carla and Jared had never lost touch. Monthly calls that spiked in frequency around birthdays. Texts that dipped around anniversaries. Ours, not theirs. One number, registered to a burner, showed up twice during Matthew's college graduation weekend. Hotel near campus. 2 nights. The second folder contained recovered texts. Screenshots with timestamps. Cross-checked with calendar events Carla had saved on our shared iCloud account. Dates I remembered driving her to conferences, retreats, SBA weekends. She always returned glowing. I used to think it was because she'd relaxed. Turns out it was Jared who did the relaxing. One message stopped my breath. Dated 5 years ago, 2 months after I had surgery for a herniated disc. She was supposed to be taking care of me. That week she'd gone grocery shopping and came back 3 hours later with nothing but a box of granola and a bottle of wine. Her text to Jared that afternoon. I still wish they knew who their real dad is. His reply? Sure, Ronnie pays for everything. Why ruin it? They knew. They knew. They were laughing behind my back while I hobbled around the kitchen with a heating pad strapped to my waist, cooking dinner for the sons I didn't biologically make, but had given every damn piece of myself to raise. I printed every single page. Color. Found it in a black binder. Labeled the spine. Truth. Then I packed a duffel. Clothes. A notebook. 2 photo albums. Left my wedding ring in the dish by the sink like a receipt. No goodbye letter. No grand statement. I drove 4 hours to the lake house my late sister left me in her will. Carla never liked going there. Too quiet, too old-fashioned. I never put her name on the deed. One of the last things I kept to myself. There's no Wi-Fi. No neighbors close enough to care. Just pine trees, a radio, and the kind of silence that doesn't ask questions. I didn't turn off my phone. I just stopped answering. Carla called twice the first night. Left a voicemail. Where are you? I made reservations for dinner. I didn't respond. Matthew texted, Mom's worried. You okay? I stared at it for a while, then turned the phone over and let it vibrate until the battery died. By the time the sun rose the next day, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Weightlessness. Not joy. Not peace. Just the slow uncoiling of a man who finally set down the burden of pretending. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't escaping. I was simply removing myself from the script they'd written, one where I paid the bills, smiled for the camera, and stayed in the background like a loyal prop. That version of me, dead. What came next? Would be designed, the same way I used to engineer flight systems. Precise, efficient, and irreversible. It took her exactly 48 hours to weaponize concern into control. The first day, she called. Repeatedly. I let it ring out. Let her worry brew like a slow kettle she couldn't take off the stove. The second day, my neighbor from back home, Randy, the ex-cop with binoculars and a nosy streak, texted me. Cops were at your place. Carla's saying you're missing. I almost laughed. Almost. Not quite. The next morning, I answered a call from a blocked number. Mr. P, this is Officer Landers from. I'm alive, I said flatly. I am of sound mind. I am not in danger. Please remove the report. A pause. Sir, your wife said. She's not my wife anymore. She's a woman who lied to me for nearly 3 decades. Remove the report. Then I hung up. That same afternoon, I visited a local bank branch in a town so small the manager still wore a name tag that said, "Family is everything." Ironic. I sat down with a financial advisor and executed the documents I'd prepared for months, back when retirement was the only thing I was preparing for. Not betrayal. I transferred every liquid asset I had into a newly created trust, under my name only. Carla was removed as the co-beneficiary. The joint account? Frozen, pending division. I replaced the account's emergency contact with my niece, Rachel, the only one in my family who ever asked how I felt, not what I could do for them. I forwarded copies to my attorney with a subject line. Begin Phase 2. Then I opened a fresh draft in my inbox and sent Carla a single line. I know, and I'm done funding the lie. That was it. No signature. No warmth. An hour later, her reply hit like a drunk slap in a church. You're being cruel. They're still your boys. Oh, still your boys. Not our sons. Not your family. Still, your boys. As if the paternity fraud had an expiration date and a loyalty clause. I typed slowly, with clarity only rage can gift. No, they were your secret. Now they're your responsibility. No regards. No, Ronald. No polite ending. Just a period, like the end of a sentence no one wanted to read out loud. I didn't wait for a reply. I powered down the phone and poured myself a glass of scotch I'd been saving since 2005, the year Dean got accepted into college, and I thought I'd done something right. Turns out I'd just funded the result of someone else's pleasure. As I watched the sun drop into the lake like a dying ember, I wondered how long it would take before she realized what was actually missing. It wasn't me she filed a report for. It was the man who blindly paid the mortgage. The one who never asked questions. The fool in the family photos. That man. She could consider him officially deceased. No wake. No obituary. Just silence, signed and notarized. I saw her car before I heard it. Red Acura, still with the dealership plate frame I paid for last Christmas. She drove like she used to when she was angry at traffic. Fast enough to make a point, but not enough to get pulled over. Gravel spat from the tires as she braked hard in the driveway, as if the car itself shared her urgency. She didn't even knock. She just started yelling. Ronald, open the damn door. You don't get to vanish. I was sitting on the porch in an old rocking chair, coffee cooling in a chipped mug beside me, binder on my lap like a holy text. She stormed toward the steps. Do you have any idea what this is doing to the boys? There. I raised a hand. Not a gesture of peace. Just control. She stopped. Not out of respect, out of shock. I stood slowly, walked to the edge of the porch, and handed her 3 things. First, the printed DNA results. 2 pages. Clinical, undeniable. Second, a USB drive in a plastic sleeve, screenshots, messages, timestamps. Third, the updated copy of my will. She stared down at them like they were foreign artifacts from a world where actions had consequences. Then she looked up, eyes red, mouth trembling. It was one mistake. Long ago, she said. That same line. One mistake. As if betrayal had a statute of limitations. As if 2 sons and nearly 3 decades of deception could be compressed into a singular misstep. I tilted my head. One mistake doesn't span 27 years, Carla. They needed a father, she snapped. And you were good at it. Like a babysitter with a checkbook? She flinched. I stepped closer. She flinched again. I'm not angry, I said, voice low, steady. I'm just done. She reached for my arm. Ronnie, please. I pulled back. You don't get to use that name anymore. Her lips parted, but no sound came. I turned, opened the screen door, stepped inside, and, without looking back, closed and locked it. The sound of that lock clicking shut was quieter than a whisper, but it hit her like a verdict. She stayed, first pacing the porch, then slumping into the wicker chair, knees pulled up, phone in hand. She called someone, maybe Matthew, maybe Dean. I didn't care. I didn't listen. I sat on the floor in the living room, back to the wall, flipping through the photo album of our wedding. I stopped on one picture, Carla laughing, holding a sparkler. Jared was behind her. Back then I didn't notice him. Now I couldn't unsee him. Outside, the day crawled toward dusk. She sat there, crying, calling, waiting, as if waiting was enough to reverse the truth. As if her presence could unlock a door that wasn't closed from guilt, but from clarity. She stayed until the sky turned navy, the porch light flicked on automatically, and the air took on that late-cold bite. She finally left, but not before walking back to the door one last time. Please, she whispered through the wood. Don't do this. I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't need to, because silence was finally louder than anything she could say. The summons came by courier, hand-delivered to the lake house in a crisp envelope that smelled like overconfidence and cheap printer toner. Carla had filed for divorce on the grounds of abandonment, no less. As if walking away from a rigged table was the crime, and not the decades-long con she ran with a smile and a silk robe. Her claim? Financial abuse. She painted herself as the betrayed spouse. Said I controlled the finances and isolated her emotionally. Claimed I fled in some senile spiral and left her and our sons without support. Cute. She must have thought silence meant guilt. It didn't. It meant preparation. I showed the documents to my lawyer, Grant Weiss, mid-60s, gray as gravel, and meaner than an IRS audit. He glanced through the filing, chuckled once, then said, "Let's end this with a fireworks show." We compiled the folder. Labeled it simply, Exhibit R. Inside, certified DNA test results. Both sons, 0% match. Screen captures of Carla's text with Jared, neatly timestamped. Hotel receipts from 3 separate out-of-town book club retreats that overlapped exactly with conception windows. Birth certificates cross-referenced with my travel logs. I was in Texas. Dean was conceived in Vermont. A financial breakdown of everything I paid over 27 years. Braces, college tuition, home renovations, cars, vacations, medical premiums, meticulously tabulated by Grant's accountant. $1,486,712.39. That's what fatherhood had cost me. But fatherhood, it turns out, had been a subscription. And I'd been charged without consent. The day of the first court appearance, Carla arrived in a gray suit tied around the arms, probably borrowed confidence. Her lawyer, Dennis Albright, was a bloated man with veneers and a voice that always sounded like it was selling something. Grant and I said nothing through the initial motions. But when the judge asked for opening statements, Grant stood, walked to the bench, and handed the clerk the binder. "Your Honor, we intend to prove paternity fraud with full documentation," he said. Carla froze. Dennis stammered. "This wasn't part of discovery." "It's new and devastating," Grant replied. The judge flipped through a few pages, expression unchanging, until he reached the side-by-side photos of Jared and Matthew. Same jaw, same lazy left eye. Then the text message. Ronnie pays for everything. Why ruin it? Silence settled over the courtroom like fog. The judge finally looked up. Mrs. P, is this your signature? Carla didn't answer. Her lawyer leaned over, whispered something through clenched teeth. She blinked, then nodded. Grant didn't gloat. He just sat down, folded his hands, and waited. Dennis turned to Carla and muttered, "We should settle." But it was too late, because the judge had already marked the fraud on the docket. And with fraud, there are no clean divorces. There are scorched earth endings, the kind that make headlines in quiet towns. And I wasn't the one on trial anymore. She was. The first message came at 2:11 a.m. Dean. A long, rambling text filled with apology-shaped words, but no actual ownership. We didn't know. I swear, Dad, we didn't know. Mom never said anything. You'll always be Dad to us. Always. Please talk to me. I stared at it for a while. Not out of emotion. Out of study. Like I was examining a satellite image of a crash site. He said Dad. Twice. But not once did he say sorry. Not once did he ask what I needed. What it cost me. What it meant to be erased biologically and emotionally in the same year. I didn't reply. That was the last thing I still controlled, silence. Matthew arrived 2 days later. The sound of his car, a diesel engine I'd paid to replace 3 years ago, echoed through the pines. I didn't go outside. Just watched from the second floor, blinds tilted. He walked up to the porch, stood in front of the door like a boy caught stealing candy, and knocked. Softly, like he was hoping I wouldn't hear it. Then louder. Then again. I let the wind answer him. After a few minutes, he noticed the note taped to the front window, neatly printed on white cardstock in block letters. I was Dad until I wasn't. He stood there, unmoving, for almost 10 minutes, like the note might change its mind. Then he left. No shouting. No threats. Just a man walking back to a car with nothing left in the tank. They both tried calling after that. Not incessantly. Just enough to prove to themselves that they tried. I didn't block them. That would have given them too much importance. Then came the twist they weren't prepared for. They reached out to Jared, their biological father, the one they never knew, but now needed like a lifeline. He ghosted them within 2 days. Blocked on socials. No reply to emails. One mutual friend told Matthew that Jared called them a liability and said he was never built for fatherhood anyway. Poetic. They went from having 2 fathers to none in a single season. I could almost pity them, if I hadn't been the man filling that gap for nearly 30 years while the Real donor played Ghost and Carla played Saint. Dean sent one last text. I know I can't change biology, but you were the one who raised us. Doesn't that count for something? I didn't answer. Because the truth was simple, it used to count for everything. But everything had a cost. And mine had been paid in full with interest. The account was closed. Balance, 0. The clause was a single line buried deep in the middle of the trust update, right after a section about charitable distributions and well before the legal boilerplate that no one ever reads. Inheritance is limited to direct biological descendants of the settler, verified by independent DNA testing conducted within 12 months of the settler's passing. No room for interpretation. No emotional gray area. It didn't name names. It just drew a bloodline, and they weren't in it. I sent a PDF copy of the revised trust to Carla's email with the subject line. Updated terms. Then I added 2 CCs, Matthew and Dean. No explanation. Just the document. It took exactly 13 minutes before Dean responded. What the hell is this? Is this legal? 2 minutes later. But we were still your sons. I let it sit for a while. Let them squirm. Let them read and reread the line that erased the imagined future they'd built around my supposed generosity. Then I typed back. No, you were my burden, and I carried it with love until truth relieved me. Carla replied next. Of course, you're doing this out of spite. You raised them. You loved them. I didn't answer. She knew I loved them. That was the most devastating part. Love wasn't the issue. Fraud was. My attorney filed the amendments publicly that Friday, as per standard procedure. The probate court records became available Monday morning. It took half a day before the local whispers started about how the P Boys had been written out completely. No trust fund, no property, no college debt forgiveness. Just their names struck through in red pen like clerical errors. Instead, I named Rachel, my late sister's daughter, and Marcus, my godson and former engineering student. Both had written me birthday cards every year. Neither had ever asked for money. They called me Uncle Ron or Professor, never Wallet. When the news reached the boys, Matthew called twice. No voicemail. Dean texted, "You're erasing our lives." I didn't reply, because I hadn't erased anything. They were living in a story that was never true. I'd simply stopped pretending. I heard through a neighbor that Carla went ballistic, screamed at her lawyer in the parking lot of the courthouse, said something about public humiliation and being made to look like a con artist. Made to look? No, sweetheart. You did that all by yourself. The next week, I updated my medical directives and added an addendum to the trust. Under no circumstances were Carla, Matthew, or Dean to make decisions regarding my health or estate, even in emergency scenarios. I left instructions for them to be escorted out of any hospital room if they tried. It wasn't revenge. It was closure signed, notarized, and legally airtight. They weren't just cut off. They were erased from the future they thought they were owed. Not because I stopped being a father, but because I had finally learned the difference between being a parent and being used. The courier left it at 9:16 a.m. No signature required. No return address. Just a plain, square box on Carla's front porch, mid-size, weighty, wrapped in brown craft paper with perfectly folded corners. The kind of packaging Ronald used to take pride in during Christmas when he still cared about presentation. She found it after her morning walk, still in yoga pants and overpriced sneakers, latte in hand. At first, she assumed it was something she forgot she ordered. A book, a candle set, maybe something one of the boys sent to cheer her up. She peeled back the tape with a knife from the kitchen, not noticing the small sticker on the flap. Open alone. Inside was a single item, a black hardcover photo album. High quality, leather-bound, heavy in the hands. On the front, gold lettering. The life I thought I had. She paused. Her fingers hovered over the edge of the first page, then turned it. The early photos were familiar. Her and Ronald at their wedding, on the dock at Lake Worth. The first Christmas with Matthew in her arms. Dean's second birthday, cake smeared on Ronald's cheek, all smiles and innocence. Each photo was numbered. Each moment had a handwritten label beneath it. 1997. I believed you. 2001. Thought it was real. 2005. Still pretending. Page after page. Then came the changes. By the middle of the album, faces were blacked out. Ronald's figure cut from group shots. Redacted like a government file. In one vacation picture from Yosemite, only Carla remained, smiling beside a phantom gap. Torn pages started appearing. Christmases that should have meant something, ripped in jagged halves. One photo showed Ronald at Dean's graduation. It had been slashed vertically down the middle. Dean's half gone. Ronald's side left intact, with a note written under it in sharp black ink. I showed up. You never did. On the second to last page, a full-page spread, a court transcript excerpt, printed and laminated. The judge's voice confirming paternity fraud. Carla's silence on record. Official. Eternal. And then, the final page. A letter. Typed. Signed in black ink. Carla. Love is blind. But courts are not. You stole decades from me, time, trust, identity. I took back what I could. The rest? I've left in your name. The brokenness. The questions. The boys who now understand silence louder than love. There will be no second act. No redemption arc. You lied. I lived it. Now you live with it. DNA doesn't lie. And I finally stopped lying to myself. Ronald. Carla read it 3 times. Then closed the album, gripping it so tightly her nails bent into the cover. For a moment, she looked around, as if someone might be watching. But no one was. No more Ronald. No more family dinners. No more half-hearted calls from sons who didn't know who they were anymore. She thought he'd break. That the old man would shout, rage, maybe forgive in some bitter, noble gesture. But he didn't. He'd erased himself from the photo and left her holding the proof, not of his love, but of his absence. Permanent, deliberate, clean.
The laughter around the table hit me like a slap. to the genius who keeps us all afloat," Diane, my mother-in-law, declared, raising her wine glass with exaggerated flair. Her voice dripped with a mock sincerity that didn't quite hide the edge beneath it. Around the room, the others joined in, the clinking glasses and grinning. I forced a smile, the kind you wear when you're not sure whether you're being celebrated or mocked. The back of my neck prickled with unease. Then she said it. "He's a genius with numbers, but he never thought to double-check his own family tree." The words landed like a gut punch. My wife, Megan, burst out laughing, her hand flying to her mouth as if to stifle it. The laugh was too quick, too rehearsed. Her gaze flickered away from mine, her cheeks tinged with a flush that wasn't from the wine. My daughter, Lily, seated beside her, giggled innocently, oblivious to the tension that suddenly gripped the room. The sound of clinking glasses reverberated around me, each one feeling like an accusation. My hands clenched under the table, nails biting into my palms as I forced myself to stay calm. A knot had begun to form in my stomach, tight and heavy, as though my instincts were screaming at me to pay attention. For years, I had been the provider, the protector, the one who never questioned. I'd poured everything into this family. My money, my time, my love. And yet, sitting there in my own house, on my own birthday, I suddenly felt like a stranger. Diane leaned back in her chair, her expression smug as she took a slow sip of wine. "Well, you've always trusted us, haven't you, dear?" she added, her tone syrupy sweet, the kind that dared me to respond. Megan shot her a look, a warning glance that was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. She reached across the table, placing a hand on mine. "Ignore her," she said with a soft laugh, her voice dripping with charm. "You know how she gets after a few drinks." But I didn't feel like laughing. Not anymore. The words hung in the air, unshakable. "Double-check your family tree." They echoed in my mind, a whisper that demanded answers I wasn't ready to face. I excused myself, muttering something about needing fresh air, and slipped out to the patio. The cold night hit me hard, clearing my head just enough to focus. That single comment, seemingly harmless, felt loaded, like the first domino in a chain waiting to topple. I stared out at the darkness, my breath fog in the air. The pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even realized I was holding began to snap into place. Why had Megan been pushing for more money lately? Why had Diane moved in temporarily but never left? Why had Megan become so cagey about expenses, brushing off my questions with vague reassurances about family, necessities? And why, God, why did that stupid joke feel more like a warning than a punchline? As I stood there, trying to piece it together, a single, chilling thought crept into my mind. What if I'd been blind this whole time? What if everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie? I had no answers, but I knew one thing for sure. By the end of tonight, I was going to find out. I returned to the dining room with the same forced smile, but my mind was racing. Diane had settled into her chair, contentedly swirling her wine, while Megan focused on cutting Lily's dessert into bite-sized pieces. The sight of them sitting there, so composed, so casual, made my stomach churn. The joke, the way they laughed, Megan's fleeting glance, the smugness in Diana's tone, none of it felt like a coincidence. As the evening wound down, Megan leaned in and whispered, "I'll put Lily to bed. Why don't you relax? It's your night." She kissed my cheek, leaving behind the faint scent of her perfume. It was one I hadn't bought her. I mumbled something noncommittal, and she disappeared upstairs with Lily. Diane lingered, fussing with empty wine glasses. She caught my eye and smirked. "You've really spoiled us, you know. Not many men would be as generous as you." Her words were deliberate, calculated. I felt my jaw tighten, but I said nothing. Instead, I excused myself and went to my office. Once the door clicked shut, I let out a shaky breath and sat at my desk. My laptop stared back at me, a window into the life I thought I controlled. It started with the bank statements. Megan had always insisted on handling the household budget, saying it was easier for her to manage everything. At the time, I'd agreed. Why wouldn't I? She was organized, meticulous, and had a knack for keeping things running smoothly. But as I opened the accounts, I realized I hadn't looked at the details in years. The charges came into focus like pieces of a puzzle. $3,800 at a boutique jewelry store, $2,200 at a luxury spa, $5,000 transferred to an account I didn't recognize. What the hell? I scrolled further, my chest tightening with every new discovery. designer shoes, 5-star hotel bookings, trips to exclusive resorts. Megan had always explained away these indulgences as family gifts or special treats for all the hard work you do. But there was nothing here for me or Lily. The tension in my chest turned to cold anger. Before I could stop myself, I reached for the filing cabinet where we kept personal documents. My hands trembled as I rifled through the folders, looking for anything that might explain what I was seeing. Bills, insurance papers, tax returns. There at the back was a small folder labeled Miscellaneous. Inside were receipts, piles of them, all for the same kinds of purchases I'd just uncovered. Handbags, jewelry, and salon appointments. One receipt caught my eye, a charge for a week-long trip to Miami. We'd never gone to Miami, and then I saw it. Her name listed with another, not mine. I slammed the folder shut, my breathing ragged. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to confront her, to storm upstairs and demand answers. But I stopped myself. No, this wasn't enough. Not yet. If Megan and Diane were lying to me, I needed proof. All of it. I leaned back in my chair, the cold fury giving way to a terrifying clarity. Tomorrow I'd make some calls, check every account, every transaction. If there was a truth they were hiding, I'd find it, and then I'd make them regret ever thinking they could play me. The next morning, I made an excuse to leave the house early. Megan barely looked up from her coffee, offering a distracted, "Have a good day," as I walked out the door. Diane was perched at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, throwing me a smug glance. I felt their eyes on my back as I left, the air between us charged with unspoken tension. Once I got to the office, I shut the door and got to work. First, I called the bank and asked for a full breakdown of our joint account's recent activity. The representative's tone changed the moment I mentioned I was the account holder. "Just one moment, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice dropping into a professional monotone. "Let me pull that up for you." When she returned, she hesitated before speaking. "Are you aware that there's been a significant increase in outgoing transfers over the past 18 months? A lot of large purchases. Send me everything." I cut her off, my patience thinning. The email came through minutes later. I opened the file and stared at a list of transactions that made my head spin. A $10,000 transfer to an account labeled DMM Holdings stood out immediately. There were more. $7,500 to a private travel agency, $6,000 to a high-end jeweler, and $4,200 to a boutique cosmetic clinic. None of this had ever been discussed. The more I scrolled, the angrier I became. I'd worked tirelessly for years, pulling late nights, taking risky deals, and constantly fighting to stay ahead in a cutthroat industry. And this was how my sacrifices were being rewarded. I wasn't just angry, I was embarrassed. This wasn't just deceit, it was mockery. By noon, I had tracked down D&M Holdings, and what I uncovered made my stomach drop. It was a shell company registered to Diane. She was funneling money out of our accounts under the guise of family needs. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding. This wasn't just Megan. Diane was in on it too, boldly, shamelessly siphoning off what I worked so hard to earn. By the time I got home that evening, I was seething. But I forced myself to stay calm. If they suspected I knew, they might cover their tracks. I had to play the part of the oblivious husband a little longer. Megan was in the living room when I walked in, scrolling through her tablet. She glanced up, her expression carefully neutral. "You're home late," she said. Her voice casual, but there was an edge to it. "Long day," I replied, shrugging off my jacket. Diane emerged from the kitchen, carrying a glass of wine like she owned the place. She didn't say a word, just gave me a knowing smirk before disappearing down the hall. Megan stood, setting the tablet aside. "Everything okay? You've seemed a little off since last night." Her words were calm, but her eyes searched mine, cautious, calculating. I forced a smile. "I'm fine. Just tired. Let's get some sleep." She hesitated, studying me, but finally nodded. Lying in bed that night, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more. Something irrefutable. Something that would destroy whatever game they thought they were playing. The DNA test kit I'd ordered was arriving tomorrow. That would be the first step. The second step, ensuring they wouldn't see what was coming next. The DNA test arrived the next morning, discreetly packaged and left on my doorstep. I slipped it into my briefcase before anyone else in the house could notice. The weight of the small box felt heavier than it should, like a secret waiting to implode. At breakfast, Diane sat at the head of the table, sipping her coffee and scrolling her phone. Megan was fussing over Lily's hair, humming to herself. It was a perfect scene of domestic tranquility. Yet every detail seemed staged, calculated. "Any big plans today?" Anne asked, her tone light but probing. "Just work," I replied curtly. Not looking up from my plate, she smirked. "You're always working." No wonder Megan needs a little extra pampering to keep things balanced. Megan shot her a warning glance, but Diane just chuckled. My grip on the coffee mug tightened, but I forced a neutral expression. Once I was out of the house, I drove to my office but couldn't bring myself to go inside. Instead, I parked in a quiet corner of the lot and opened the DNA test. I carefully followed the instructions, swabbing my cheek and sealing the sample. Then I stared at the second swab, the one meant for Lily. Getting her sample would be tricky, but I had a plan. That evening, I suggested a family movie night. Megan seemed surprised but agreed, and Lily was ecstatic. As we settled in, I brought out a tray of snacks, including a lollipop for Lily. "Wow, thanks, Dad," she chirped, unwrapping it eagerly. I watched her closely as she licked the candy, waiting for the right moment. When she got distracted by the screen, I took the discarded stick, carefully wrapped it in plastic, and slipped it into my pocket. Megan didn't notice a thing. The next morning, I sent both samples to the lab, paying extra for expedited results. The waiting was excruciating. Every interaction with Megan and Diane felt like a battle of wills. They were watching me more closely now, their smiles forced, their attempts at conversation oddly strained. On the third day, Megan cornered me in the kitchen. "You've been acting different," she said, her arms crossed. "Work stress," I replied flatly. She didn't buy it. "It feels like more than that." "You're not hiding something, are you?" I met her gaze, holding it longer than necessary. "Funny. I was about to ask you the same thing." Her eyes flickered with something, fear. "Anger." She laughed it off, brushing her hair back. "You being ridiculous?" "Am I?" I said, my voice low. The moment stretched, heavy and charged, until Diane waltzed in, breaking the tension. "You two lovebirds fighting again," she teased. Megan turned on her heel and left without a word. By the end of the week, the results arrived. I opened the email with trembling hands, and the truth hit me like a freight train. Lily wasn't mine. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. The words seemed to mock me, confirming what my gut had suspected all along. The world around me shifted. My family wasn't my family. My marriage wasn't my marriage. I'd built my life on a lie, and now it was all crumbling beneath me. But the rage didn't consume me. Not yet. Instead, it crystallized into something colder, sharper, a resolve to take back control. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the city. The DNA results were playing in my mind like a relentless echo. "Not biologically yours." Every word felt like a blade slicing deeper. I'd loved Lily unconditionally for 8 years, thinking she was my daughter. Now, the betrayal was suffocating. By the time I pulled into a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of town, a plan had begun forming. Megan and Diane had taken me for a fool, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. I spent the next 2 hours making calls. My first was to an old college friend, Ivan, now a corporate attorney. Ivan was sharp, ruthless, and the one person I trusted to help me navigate this storm. "I'll handle everything," he assured me. "But you need to move quietly. No confrontations, no impulsive decisions. We need them to think you're still in the dark." His words grounded me, sharpening my focus. I thanked him and hung up, already feeling a sliver of control returning. The next morning, I returned home as if nothing had happened. Megan greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Where were you?" she asked, feigning concern. "Work ran late," I replied smoothly. "Had some things to sort out." She studied me for a moment before nodding, her mask of calm slipping back into place. Diane, however, was less subtle. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed and eyebrows raised. "Everything all right, genius?" she asked, her voice dripping with mockery. "Never better," I replied with a grin that didn't match the cold fury boiling beneath my skin. Over the next week, I began gathering more evidence. The financial discrepancies I'd uncovered were just the beginning. I accessed our joint email account, sifting through years of correspondence. That's where I found it. A trail of receipts and invoices tied to Diane's shell company. It was worse than I'd imagined. They drained over $200,000 in the past 3 years, funneling it into extravagant vacations, cosmetic procedures, and luxury goods. One transaction stood out, a $25,000 wire transfer to an individual I didn't recognize. A quick online search revealed he was a personal trainer. My chest tightened as the puzzle pieces clicked into place. The late-night gym sessions Megan had started last year. The expensive fitness gear she claimed was an investment in her health. It wasn't health she was investing in. I printed everything, emails, receipts, bank statements, and stored it in a secure folder on my laptop. Meanwhile, Megan and Diane were becoming restless. They must have sensed something was off. Diane's snide remarks grew sharper, and Megan's attempts to engage me felt forced. One evening, while Lily was upstairs, Megan finally confronted me. "You've been so distant lately," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "If something's wrong, just say it." I looked at her, calm and measured. "What could possibly be wrong, Megan? Everything seems perfect." Her eyes narrowed, searching for cracks in my facade. "It doesn't feel perfect. You're hiding something." I leaned in slightly, my voice dropping. "Maybe I'm just tired of being everyone's bank account." The color drained from her face. But before she could respond, Diane barged into the room, her timing impeccable. "Everything okay here?" she asked, her tone laced with Fox concern. "Couldn't be better," I replied, walking past them both. Inside, though, I was fuming. They were circling the wagons, trying to protect whatever web of lies they'd spun. But they didn't know I was already 10 steps ahead. The divorce papers would be ready soon, and once they were, and unleash everything. The DNA test, the financial fraud, the betrayal. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to dismantle the entire charade, piece by piece, and they'd never see it coming. The next few days were a delicate dance. I acted like nothing was wrong, keeping my demeanor neutral and my routine consistent. Megan and Diane still seemed suspicious, their behavior oscillating between forced friendliness and thinly veiled tension. The air in the house was stifling, every conversation a landmine. Meanwhile, I was executing my plan with precision. I scheduled a meeting with Ivan to finalize the divorce papers and began shifting my assets. My business accounts were moved into a trust under my name alone, and I initiated the process of transferring the deed for the house into a corporate holding. Megan wouldn't see a dime from this when the dust settled. At the same time, I started playing their game. One evening, I casually brought up our finances during dinner. "I was thinking," I said, spearing a piece of chicken on my fork, "maybe it's time we rework the budget. Make things more efficient." Megan froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Diane's eyes flicked up from her plate, narrowing slightly. "Efficient?" Megan asked, her tone carefully neutral. "Yeah, you know. Take a closer look at where the money's going. Make sure we're on top of everything. I can set up a spreadsheet this weekend." "That's not necessary," Diane interjected smoothly. "Megan's been handling it just fine, haven't you?" "Dear," Megan nodded quickly. "Yeah, I've got it under control. You don't need to worry about it." "I'm not worried," I said, forcing a smile. "Just curious. It's always good to stay informed." Diane let out a dry laugh. "Well, if you're so curious, why don't you let Megan show you all those boring receipts? You'd love that, wouldn't you, genius?" The condescension in her voice was razor sharp. But I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I shrugged and changed the subject, letting them think they'd dodged a bullet. Later that night, as Megan slept, I unlocked her phone. The passcode was the same as it had been for years. She never thought I'd have a reason to check. Her messages told me everything I needed to know. There were exchanges with someone named Travis, filled with flirtatious banter and plans to meet up. Photos, intimate ones, sent back and forth, time-stamped on days she claimed to be running errands. My stomach churned as I scrolled, but I forced myself to keep going. Then I saw the most damning thread of all, a conversation between Megan and Diane. "Megan, he's been acting weird. Do you think he knows?" Diane, "Stop overthinking. He's too wrapped up in work to notice anything. Just keep him distracted." Megan, "I don't like this. If he finds out about the money." Diane, "He won't. You're smarter than him, remember. Play your role." Play your role. The words burned into my mind as I sat there, the betrayal solidifying into cold resolve. They thought they were clever, but they'd underestimated me. The next morning, I locked myself in my office and drafted an email to Even. I attached every piece of evidence I'd gathered. The DNA test, financial records, the screenshots of their messages. "Prepare for the nuclear option," I wrote. The response came within an hour. "Done. Let me know when you want to initiate." By the time I stepped out of my office, Megan was waiting for me in the hallway. "You're spending a lot of time in there," she said, her voice casual but her eyes wary. "Just work," I replied smoothly. "You know how it is." She studied me for a moment, and I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. "What's on your mind?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Nothing," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just don't work too hard, okay?" Her mask was slipping, and it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. I walked away, my heart pounding. The stage was set, and the players were in place. All that was left was to pull the curtain back and watch them crumble. The morning started like any other, mundane routine, but crackling with unspoken tension. Megan busied herself in the kitchen while Diane lingered in the living room, sipping coffee and flipping through a magazine. Lily was at school, which left the house eerily quiet. I sat at the dining table, casually scanning emails on my laptop, though my focus was elsewhere. The meeting with Ivan was scheduled for later that afternoon, and with every passing moment, my resolve hardened. As I scrolled, Diane's voice broke the silence. "You've been so reserved lately," she remarked, not looking up from her magazine. "Is everything okay? You're not sick, are you?" It was a calculated jab, designed to needle at my composure. I didn't flinch. "Never better," I replied, my tone flat. Her lips curled into a faint smirk. "Good. You know, Megan and Lily depend on you so much. It'd be such a shame if something disrupted the balance." I met her gaze, letting the weight of my stare do the talking. She blinked first, her mask slipping ever so slightly, before turning back to her magazine. Megan walked in a moment later, her movements stiff. She'd been unusually quiet since the night before, and I could feel her eyes on me, searching for a crack in the armor I'd carefully constructed. "What's the plan for today?" she asked, her voice overly casual. "Just work," I said, not looking up. "Same as always." Her laugh was forced. "You've been working a lot lately. Maybe we should plan a weekend trip. Just the two of us." The audacity of her suggestion nearly made me laugh. I kept my expression neutral, closing my laptop. "We'll see." Her face fell slightly, the rejection registering. She glanced at Diane, who gave her a subtle nod. Whatever they were planning, they were growing desperate. Later that afternoon, I met with Ivan at his downtown office. He spread the documents across his desk, a mountain of evidence I'd collected, meticulously organized into a timeline of deceit. "This is airtight," he said. "Tap in the DNA results. Between this and the financial fraud, she doesn't stand a chance. You'll walk away clean, and they'll be left with nothing." I nodded, but a knot formed in my chest. "What about Lily?" Even paused, his expression softening. "That's your call. If you want to fight for custody, we can frame it as Megan being unfit. But given the DNA results," I shook my head. "No, I'll provide for her, but from a distance. She doesn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this mess." Ivan leaned back, studying me. "You're handling this well. Most people in your position would lose their heads." "They underestimated me," I said simply. "That was their first mistake." We finalized the divorce papers and outlined the next steps. By the time I left his office, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. The pieces were falling into place, and the end game was in sight. When I returned home, the atmosphere was different. Megan was in the kitchen, her back to me as she cleaned the counters with an intensity that bordered on manic. Diane was on the couch, her phone in hand, eyes darting toward me as I entered. Megan said, her voice overly bright. "I thought we could have a nice dinner tonight." "Justice." I raised an eyebrow. "What's the occasion?" She hesitated, glancing at Diane. "No occasion. Just thought it'd be nice." Diane chimed in from the couch. "You deserve a little appreciation after all. You do so much for this family." Their coordinated act was almost impressive, but I wasn't biting. "Sure," I said, feigning interest. "Sounds good." As Megan busied herself with dinner, I retreated to my office, locking the door behind me. I opened my laptop and pulled up the email from Ivan, scanning the finalized documents one more time. Everything was ready. All I had to do was deliver the blow. From the kitchen, I could hear Megan and Diane talking in hushed tones, their voices rising and falling like waves. They thought they were safe. They thought they were still in control. They were wrong. Tomorrow, everything would come crashing down. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the house still and silent. Megan was asleep beside me, her breathing steady, unaware that today was the day her lies would unravel. Diane's room was dark, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if she ever truly rested, or if her mind was always scheming. I showered quickly, dressed, and headed to my office. The divorce papers were in my briefcase, along with every piece of damning evidence I'd collected. By the end of the day, Megan and Diana's carefully constructed charade would crumble, and I'd be free from the web they had spun around me. But first, I needed to set the stage. At breakfast, I played my part flawlessly. Megan smiled at me over her coffee, trying to gauge my mood. Diane was her usual self, tossing out sharp remarks about my workaholic tendencies and how Megan deserved more attention. "You're right, Diane," I said suddenly, interrupting her mid-rant. She froze, startled. Megan glanced at me, her eyes narrowing. "I've been too distant lately. I think it's time we had a proper family discussion." Megan's grip tightened around her coffee mug. Diane recovered quickly, her smirk returning. "Well," she said. "Tonight," I continued, my tone calm, "I want both of you here. We'll clear the air." Megan's face paled, but she nodded. "I've got sounds." "Good. Perfect," I said, standing. "I'll see you both tonight." And the day passed in a blur. At the office, Ivan and I reviewed the final steps of the plan. Every financial loophole was secured, every asset protected. Megan and Diane wouldn't walk away with a penny more than I allowed. "You're ready for this?" Ivan asked as I stood to leave. I nodded. "I've been ready for a long time." That evening, I returned home earlier than usual. Megan and Diane were waiting in the living room, their postures stiff, their expressions wary. Lily was upstairs, thankfully oblivious to the storm brewing below. I set my briefcase down and took a seat across from them, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. "Well," Diane said finally, her tone sharp. "What's this all about?" I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. "It's about the truth. About the lies you've been feeding me for years." Megan's eyes widened, and Diane's smug expression faltered. "Don't play dumb," I said coldly, pulling out the stack of documents. "I know everything. The shell company, the wire trancations, the DNA test." Megan gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Diane's face twisted into a sneer. "You went through our finances," Megan stammered, her voice trembling. "How could you? How could I?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "How could you? How could you stand there, day after day, pretending to be a wife and a mother while lying to my face?" "It's not what you think," Megan cried, tears streaming down her face. "Save it," I snapped, slamming the DNA results onto the table. "Lily isn't mine. She never was, and you knew it." Diane tried to step in, her voice dripping with venom. "You have no right." I turned on her, my glare silencing her mid-sentence. "No right. You've been stealing from me, Diane. Hundreds of thousands of dollars funneled into your little schemes. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" Megan was sobbing now, her defenses crumbling. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," she whispered. "Then how did you mean for it to happen, Megan?" I demanded. "Did you think I'd never find out? That I'd keep blindly funding your little fantasy life?" "Ike," she started, but I held up a hand, cutting her off. "This ends now. I've filed for divorce. The house, the accounts, everything. It's all under my name. You have 1 month to move out." Diane's face contorted with fury. "You can't do this. We've given you everything. Everything," I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You've given me lies, betrayal, and now you'll reap what you've sown." I stood, grabbing my briefcase. "You'll hear from my lawyer. Until then, don't speak to me unless it's about Lily." Megan collapsed into the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. Diane glared at me, her lips curling into a spiteful sneer. "This isn't over," she hissed. "Oh, it is," I replied, my voice icy. "You just don't know it yet." I walked out of the room, the weight of years of betrayal finally lifting. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The day after the confrontation, the house was unnaturally quiet. Diane had retreated to her room, slamming the door behind her the night before. Megan barely left the couch, her eyes swollen and red from hours of crying. The tension was palpable, coiling around the air like a noose. I moved through the house with purpose, making it clear I wasn't here to comfort them or ease their guilt. My focus was solely on preparing the next steps and ensuring there was no room for their manipulations to derail the plan. By mid-afternoon, Diane resurfaced. She planted herself in the kitchen, arms crossed, watching as I prepared coffee. "You've really lost it," she said coldly. "Do you have any idea what this will do to Lily?" Her attempt to leverage my love for Lily only hardened my resolve. "Don't pretend to care about Lily's well-being, Diane," I said, my tone razor sharp. "You've been complicit in this from the start. You've used her, just like you've used me." She recoiled slightly, but her venom returned quickly. "You think you're some kind of victim. You're a control freak who always wanted everything your way. Megan deserved better." I set the coffee mug down with a deliberate thud, meeting her glare head-on. "And she found better in Travis, I assume. Or was that your idea, too?" Her face froze for a moment, the briefest flicker of panic crossing her features before she composed herself. "You don't know what you're talking about," she hissed. "I know enough," I said, leaning in slightly. "And so will everyone else soon enough." She turned on her heel and stormed out of the kitchen. But I could hear her muttering under her breath. She was rattled, and that was exactly what I wanted. By evening, Megan finally approached me. She stood in the doorway to my office, her hands wringing together. "Can we talk?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible. I gestured for her to sit, keeping my expression neutral. She perched on the edge of the chair, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for a lifeline. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for things to get this far. I made mistakes." I raised an eyebrow. "Mistakes? Is that what you call years of lies and deceit?" Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over as she shook her head. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." "Diane," she convinced me. "Stop," I said sharply, cutting her off. "You don't get to blame this on Diane. You made your choices, Megan. You lied to me. You stole from me. You betrayed me. I didn't steal," she blurted out, her voice rising. I thought we deserved better. You were always so focused on work, and I felt like I didn't matter anymore." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and unrestrained. "So you decided to spend my money on jewelry, vacations, and another man. That's how you solve feeling unimportant." Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered through her sobs. I leaned back in my chair, watching her with a mixture of detachment and pity. "I trusted you. I built a life for us, a life you took for granted. But that's over now. You've lost everything. Megan, you and your mother both." She looked up, her face streaked with tears, desperation in her eyes. "Please, don't do this. We can fix this. For Lily's sake, we can try." "For Lily's sake," I interrupted, my voice like ice. "You mean the child you allowed me to believe was mine for 8 years? The child you've used as a shield for your lies? Don't you dare invoke her now." Her sobs deepened, but I felt no sympathy. She wasn't crying because she regretted what she'd done. She was crying because her game was over. "Leave," I said finally. "I have nothing more to say to you tonight." And she hesitated for a moment, as if searching for one last argument, but when she found none, she rose and left the room, her shoulders hunched in defeat. The pieces were nearly in place. Tomorrow, the house would be listed for sale, and I'd finalize the transfer of all remaining assets. Megan and Diane had 1 month to leave, but I had no intention of staying that long. As I stared out the window into the darkened sky, a strange sense of calm settled over me. I'd been through the fire, and though the scars would remain, I was walking away stronger. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. The following morning, Megan and Diane were unusually quiet. The tension in the house was suffocating, but I welcomed it. They were scrambling now, unsure of what I'd do next, and that uncertainty gave me the upper hand. As I sipped my coffee, Megan approached cautiously. Her eyes were still red from crying, her movements hesitant. "Can we talk?" she asked. I set my cup down deliberately, gesturing for her to sit. She perched on the edge of the chair across from me, her hands fidgeting. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice shaky, "about everything. I want to make this right." I raised an eyebrow. "Right? After years of lies, you suddenly want to make it right." Her lip trembled, and she looked down. "I know I've hurt you, and I can't take that back. But we can fix this, for Lily's sake, for our family." "Or family?" I interrupted, my voice cold. "You mean the family you built on lies. The daughter you let me believe was mine. The life you financed with my money while you played house with someone else." Tears streamed down her face. But I didn't stop. "You don't get to rewrite this, Megan. You and your mother have been manipulating me for years, and now you're paying the price. This isn't something you can cry your way out of." Her sobs deepened, but there was no fight left in her. She was broken, and I felt nothing but content. That afternoon, Ivan called to confirm everything was in place. The house was officially listed for sale, and all joint accounts had been closed or transferred. Megan and Diane had no access to my finances, no leverage left to hold over me. "They're going to fight this," Ivan warned. "Let them," I replied. Later that evening, I called Megan and Diane into the living room. They entered hesitantly, exchanging glances. Diane's usual smugness had been replaced by a brittle, forced calm. Megan looked like a shell of herself, her face pale and drawn. "This is how it's going to work." I began, my tone leaving no room for argument. "The house is being sold. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. Lily will remain under my financial support, but only for her needs, not yours." Diane scoffed, crossing her arms. "You can't just throw us out like this. We have rights. You have nothing." I cut her off, my voice sharp. "I've protected everything I've worked for. You won't see another dime from me. Consider it a generous consequence for what you've done." Megan tried to speak, but I raised a hand, silencing her. "You don't get to negotiate," I said, my gaze piercing hers. "This is the end of the line. You and your mother took advantage of me, of my trust, and now it's over." She crumbled into tears again, while Diane glared at me with unrestrained hatred. "This isn't over, Diane's bat." "It is," I replied, my voice steady. "You just don't have the power to admit it yet." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them in silence. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring out the window. The storm was nearly over, but the calm I expected hadn't come. Instead, there was a hollow H, a void where my family had once been. I thought of Lily, her innocence caught in the crossfire of betrayal. She deserved better than the life Megan and Diane had created, and as much as it hurt, I knew my decisions were the right ones, for her and for myself. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life. Tomorrow, I'd finalize the last of the arrangements. Megan and Diane would be gone, and I could finally start again, alone but free. The final week passed in slow, deliberate motions. Megan and Diane avoided me as much as possible, their defeat evident in every glance and hollow word. The once pristine home had begun to lose its shine. Boxes stacked in corners, furniture left untouched, and an eerie silence replacing the chaos that used to dominate. On the last day, I watched from the doorway as movers loaded the last of their belongings into a truck. Megan stood by, her face pale and drawn, while Diane barked orders, clinging to what little control she still had. Lily sat on the porch steps, clutching her favorite stuffed animal, her wide eyes filled with confusion. When the truck pulled away, Megan hesitated, turning to me. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "There's nothing left to say," I replied evenly. Her tears welled up again, but this time I didn't feel anger or satisfaction, just an empty acceptance. "For what it's worth," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I did love you, I just lost my way." I didn't respond. She lingered a moment longer, then turned and walked toward the car where Diane waited, her face a mask of bitterness. I knelt beside Lily, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You'll be okay," I said softly. "You're stronger than you know." She nodded, but the heartbreak in her eyes was unbearable. I pulled her into a hug, knowing this moment would stay with me long after they were gone. That night, the house felt cavernous, the echoes of laughter and arguments now replaced by a profound stillness. I sat in my office, nursing a glass of bourbon and staring at the divorce papers finalized earlier that day. The weight of it all hit me at once, the betrayal, the loss, the years I'd poured into a family that wasn't mine. But beneath the pain, there was a glimmer of something else, relief. I had my life back. In the weeks that followed, I sold the house and relocated to a smaller, quieter place in another city. I focused on rebuilding, not just financially, but emotionally. Therapy helped, as did reconnecting with old friends who reminded me of the man I used to be before I lost myself in someone else's lies. One evening, while sitting on my porch, a thought struck me, simple but profound. Life doesn't stop for betrayal. It doesn't pause for heartbreak or give you time to gather yourself after you've been blindsided. It moves forward, whether you're ready or not. Looking back, I realized the signs were always there. I just didn't want to see them. Trust is a precious thing, but blind trust is a recipe for disaster. If there's one lesson I'd pass on to anyone willing to listen, it's this. Protect what you've built, but never at the expense of your own dignity. Respect yourself enough to walk away when the people closest to you show they don't deserve your faith. As for Megan and Diane, I don't know where they ended up, and I don't care. I've let that chapter close. For the first time in years, I'm living for myself. And that, more than anything, feels like victory.